Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Therapeutic Thursday with me, John Quick. As many of you are probably tired of hearing already, I'm an aortic dissection survivor, having had a type A dissection out of the blue back in 2006, which led to emergency open heart surgery, replacement aortic valve. Subsequently, I dissected with a type B, which has been medically managed now for the last 18 years, which I know will be familiar with for many of you. So I'm 18 years out. It hasn't always been an easy ride, as many as you know, but here I am. And one of the big changes that this wrought upon my life, which I'll also be discussing with our guest today, Kevin Songa, about changes, is that it pushed me down the path of maybe doing some things that I've always wanted to do with my life. So I began to train in psychology and doing various courses, beginning to work with charities and institutions, getting some more training. And this has led me to where I am today. So it was thought to be useful that perhaps I could look at this issue for us all from two sides of the coin, both as a person who's living with a condition every day and also someone who can bring some therapeutic experience to it, some guidance, some support. As I've also already said, the idea behind these sessions isn't that we're trying to do, straight on therapy as such, which might be more involved and perhaps involves some very confidential issues. But we're talking generally about some universal issues to do with the condition. And with each of our guests, we just go into some of the areas which they feel comfortable talking about. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome today's guest, who is Kevin Songa, who many of you will know for his weekly class. Is it called a class, Kevin, on Qigong, which he will explain more about, I'm sure. He himself is an aortic dissection survivor, which I believe occurred to him in 2011. I know from talking to him a little bit that he's also had some ups and downs across the road, down the road, which we'll be going into today as well. So welcome, Kevin. Lovely to have you with us.
Thank you, John. And it's always a pleasure to be associated with an Aortic Hope production.
Absolutely. Which reminds me, thank you for that I've got to tell people to like and subscribe, buy the t-shirt, etc., donate, all of those things that you love to do, I know. So if you're comfortable with it, Kevin, would you just like to give us a little background on what happened to you and how it occurred and what it was like?
John, it was like someone hit me in the back with a 2x4, and I did not know what happened, and I did not know I had an aorta or what an aorta was. So I was home alone. I drove myself to the hospital, and there was a young ER doctor who ran a CT scan, very fortunately, and then fixed me that night. My wife came up to the hospital, and the rest is history. I wouldn't change a thing if I could, because aortic dissection life has opened so many doors for me.
Okay, well, we'll come to that shortly. So, given that we've already identified that diagnosis is so important around a CT scan, and there are so many stories where people go in and they're sent away with, oh, you've got anxiety or you've got a bit of heartburn or something, and then something more significant develops or a tragedy occurs. Just walk us through a little bit about what was different about this particular doctor.
He was a young doctor, John. He was on call that night at Memorial Hospital in Jacksonville, Florida, where we were living at the time. I had finished law school and was doing some of my daily research at night when I felt just an intense pain in my jaw. So I got in my car, drove to the hospital. Unfortunately, I parked in the wrong spot, so I had to walk all the way out you to call the ambulance when something happened. So I did not call the ambulance. I just drove myself to the hospital, probably because I was a little bit in a state of denial that something serious
Yeah.
was happening to me. So then the doctor ran the CT scan, and he conversed with me and told me about my chances of making it through the surgery. And I said, do it.
Initially, I can imagine they thought you had well, it sounds like you may have thought you were having a heart attack
I
because of the
did.
jaw pain, yes?
Yes, I walked into the ER and I put my hand on my chest and I said, I think I'm having a heart attack. And so that's when they ran the CT scan.
Hmm. And were you able to be operated on in the same hospital, or did they have to transfer you somewhere?
No, it was the same hospital. The young
Mm-hmm.
doctor had not done an aortic dissection repair before,
Oof,
but he was ready to go and he did a marvelous job.
that's spectacular. Good for him, huh?
Yes, very fortunate.
So next thing you know, you're waking up in a hospital bed and your life has changed big time, no?
Yes, absolutely. Um, a quick education on the aorta and what aortic dissection is and how to live after aortic dissection, and talking to the nephrologist about kidney damage during the operation. Of course, it was a long operation. And like you, I was on the heart-lung bypass machine forever. So the pump
Mm.
head issue arose and other collateral issues that we would have to deal with subsequently. So yes, and then right after, only maybe 3 weeks later, my chest started swelling up and I had incurred an infection along the graft. So they had to go back in and pressure wash all the green off of my aorta. After that operation, John,
Was that endocarditis then?
yes, endocarditis, exactly. After,
Which is very, very serious.
it is, yes. That was difficult challenge, but I
Mm.
always had faith that we would get through this. We as survivors are a super strong bunch of people, and we have that willpower, that power to move forward and to make things better, even if they seem really tough at
Yeah,
the time.
sure. So tell us a little bit about your recovery, because I know from my own experience that it's initially is just even painful to breathe. And
Yes, I had that.
I remember, the first struggle to even take a few steps and things like that. It's literally you've walked out of one world into another, isn't it? Where we've gone into another dimension, um, which is kind of has a surreal component to it, doesn't it? When we look back on it.
It really does, John. I had to have two people help me just to go to the bathroom, learning to
Mm.
walk again. I still have problems slurring my words. So learning to talk again. And then because of the endocarditis, I had a 24/7 IV in my arm for a very long period of time with all kind of antibiotics and antifungals, and had to learn to deal with that. So life was a challenge. One step at a time is one step forward every day was my goal.
Okay. And did you notice a huge loss of strength, or did that gradually come back to you? And also, you talk about pump head. There's bound to be some PTSD. How did you feel that? What sort of impacts were there on your personality, do you think?
Oh, John, definitely PTSD, and I'm sure you've experienced the same.
Mm.
But even today, whenever a new cardiologist or radiologist looks at my CT scan, if I go in for a once a year CT scan and I talk to a new cardiologist or a new cardiologist, they're always very surprised. And sometimes they'll let the language slip, like, oh, if I didn't see you standing here alive, I would think you're dead, according to this CT scan. And that definitely has a very difficult impact or can trigger PTSD episodes. So there's always, and you never get over it, that component of dealing with PTSD as a survivor. It's something that
Mm.
we learn to live with, right?
Sure. Do you find there are little trigger moments? Because we'll come on to this, but the implications of a life-threatening incident like this aren't just the physical; they have financial and emotional implications. We've started to talk about the emotional, but one of the things I find is there'll be just like little trigger moments out of the blue. I'll read something about or see something about a heart incident. Recently watching a football player. That's football in as in soccer, as you call it, but played with the foot in
Yeah.
England, have a heart attack on the pitch. And I found that very hard to watch. And as it unfolded, and there'll be things, just something bizarre, in a series or something I'm writing, where it will give me a parallel sense of how that person's life has completely changed, and that can set me off as a little trigger point.
Most
And for
definitely.
you?
Most definitely. That's a great description, John. There are just very subtle trigger points. If you read a news article about someone having an aortic dissection but not surviving, then I always
Mm.
think that could have been me. What was the difference? Why am I here today? So I don't know if it's luck of the draw or our genetic makeup or what, but we are the survivors. And reading about someone else's demise definitely can have a trigger, and the trigger can really endanger our own health because it raises the blood pressure when we have
Yeah.
anxiety, that cortisol rush and the sympathetic response. So I have taught myself to really try to control it through belly breathing and the Qigong breath management. And that seems to
Okay.
help, or going for a walk.
Right. When you say, it's possibly strange and bizarre why we survive and someone else doesn't, is there's that concept of survivor guilt, isn't there? Does that ever come across your path? Do you ever feel that flowing
Oh,
through
yeah,
you?
right. I read a great book about, I think the title was called Surviving Survival. And I can't remember the author's name. However, great book about the PTSD and the guilt of being a survivor and how to deal with it.
So any strategies for dealing with that, or that
On,
you encounter yourself?
on surviving survival,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
I count myself to be very lucky, and I have a passion for life. So whenever I think, hey, I've got a second chance, I am just stoked to go make a video about nature or Qigong or something very positive. And of course, I've gone back to acupuncture school because I want to share that life of vitality. We call it the yang sheng lifestyle in traditional Chinese medicine terms. So I want to share that vitality for life that survivors can have. Dissection does not mean life is over. Dissection can mean that there's a new beginning.
Yes, interesting. And of course, we can mire ourselves in existential questions about why did I survive? But life can be very random like that. And basically, I think for me, what it comes down to is, well, I'm here. There's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do about being here, particularly. So why not get on with it, you know, and seize the day? And because experiencing that kind of guilt doesn't take one anywhere really. And I will often say to people, um, be careful you don't use guilt as an excuse, because if we feel guilty enough about something, we should do something about it. In it,
Exactly.
applied to anything.
I read a Taoist proverb just recently that said, get rid of your problems, stop thinking, and
Yes,
just
and
breathe.
don't believe everything you think is another great one.
Right.
Never mind, don't believe everything you read. Don't believe everything you think. Yes.
Yeah.
So I'd like to come on to acupuncture in a while because that's a really interesting subject for aortic dissection survivors, and we may be able to kind of go into a few of those kind of issues. But can you tell us a little bit about specific ways in which your life changed and you decided to make changes and so on and so forth?
After dissection,
Yes.
I realized, John, that life is short, and you do what you want to do. You have to find a passion and follow that passion. Appreciate people and love those people close to you,
Hmm.
and just enjoy every breath. Life, I really do get high on life. Life is so exciting to me. Just seeing your face in the camera across the ocean, to me, is symbolic of so much beauty that can exist in the world. So, yes,
That's
so
really
many.
kind of you. But I'm going to throw you a tough question now
Sure.
because it comes across to me that you have that sort of spirit, spirit of life within you. I'm interested to know whether that's strengthened post dissection, but also we have to be careful, don't we, that sometimes people who are really struggling out there with post dissection depression or PTSD might watch this and feel a little bit guilty if they can't get there to that kind of optimistic, positive feeling. And there's a lot of pressure in society at the moment around this whole positive vibes thing, which the risk with that is it can deny grief to people, because sorry, but a person who is in grief, just can't maybe get to the positive vibes. So what would your advice be to those people who maybe are struggling for the life spirit that you so obviously have?
I have been there, done that, and I still do struggle, John. Um, After dissection, we went through enormous financial difficulties and worked our way through those and
Yeah.
resolved those issues. But that was very hard and very demanding. Also, again, after dissection, my nephrologist told me my kidneys were in failure and I couldn't walk. And so it seemed like the physical mountains I had to climb to even just walk through a normal day was almost impossible. And again, it's just step by step. And it has been a while since both you and I have dissected.
Mm.
Um, so we have traveled that journey, but others that are just starting on this journey, I would offer them an encouragement and say, be patient, learn to live in the moment, feed your body good food, organic, locally grown food, so you don't overload your kidneys and your liver with toxins. Do simple exercises, even if it's just lifting your arms up above your head every day. You don't have to get up and do intense yoga. Simple exercises. Find a passion for life and just be very grateful. Look inward to your body. Look at your heart. Look at your aorta and learn to communicate with your organs inside your body. All those practices put together will pull you through. You'll have your ups and downs. And I agree, it's hard for many people, but be patient, step by step. You will see the light ahead.
Okay. And within that, I asked the question about, do you feel that your life spirit has strengthened post dissection, and that somehow one of the positive outcomes of this occurrence can be that we do develop a kind of deeper resilience because we've been so close to the edge. For example, I think I've lost fear about many things because I kind of think, what's the point? You know, fear is so much in my head. And what is there left to be afraid of? You know, um, would that would you share that feeling?
Yes, for sure. It's such a good feeling, John, to have been there, done that, and approached death and seen what could happen and then walk through to the other side. It does give you a renewed sense of strength and resilience to face anything that life can throw you. That's what I found.
Mm. And how do you sort of cope with given that you're obviously into leading as clean a lifestyle as you can for your own benefit? Do you find that there's almost like taking the medications is kind of counterintuitive for you because you know it's kind of defensive, it's strategic, but it's also a toxin, isn't it? The liver, the kidneys have to deal with those drugs that we're putting in our bodies.
They do, John. And one recommendation I would have for people listening that are taking medications is to be sure that you buy a quality medication. If it's metoprolol or any other beta blocker or any kind of blood pressure medication. Avoid those generic drugs that you can buy from overseas, even though the price may be attractive, because my doctors have told me that it's a high probability that when I took all of my generic drugs that I had purchased uh, as an inexpensive pharmaceutical that came and originated from the Far East, those drugs probably had a level of heavy metals or other toxins in them that caused me to develop renal cell carcinoma in my left kidney, and I had to have a portion of my left kidney removed. So my advice is if you do take pharmaceuticals, John, make sure you buy high quality pharmaceuticals and you know the origin of those drugs. Just a bit of advice that I would pass
Right.
along.
I have to declare, as a European, I didn't even know that you had those kind of choices available because in our system, where the universal healthcare is free, you get what you're prescribed. There is, you can't go to the order. Well, I suppose you could over the internet, but I've never taken anything which isn't prescribed by my doctors, by the surgeons. So, well, that's new
Yeah,
for me. Yeah.
right. Well, you generally have a choice here in the States. You can purchase a generic, what they call a generic drug, which is just it's a copycat of the original. So I like to stick with the original from a
Mm,
trusted pharmaceutical company. And again, we're taking pharmaceuticals and they are made in industrial facilities. However, I'm very grateful for what beta blockers can do to keep my blood pressure and pulse, especially under control. And then, of course, warfarin. I'm living with warfarin because I have an aortic mechanical valve, an older
hmm
style mechanical valve. So, yes, we're stuck with warfarin and beta blockers and other drugs. However, we can make the best of it, drink a lot of good, clean water, and exercise and nourish our body
mm.
with good food.
And well, it sounds like our buffet of medications is pretty much similar. I'm on the warfarin as well, um, which of course is a very old-fashioned, quite crude drug from the 1950s, well, which is interesting. But for me, for example, I'll always try and ignore it, but when I take the beta blocker and the blood pressure tablet in the morning with my breakfast, it's guaranteed that about half an hour later I'll feel, oh, it'd be quite nice to have a little sleep now, or something like that. I do notice that in my energy levels. How is that for you?
You know, John, everyone that I've talked to, almost everyone, has had side effects with beta blocker fatigue. So that is a
Mm,
very real thing. And um, I probably do experience that. However, I'm so type A and so driven and do so much Qigong that I really don't notice it. Now, I will notice it once my beta blocker begins to wear off because my pulse rate will start jumping. And I can tell when it's jumping because the St. Jude mechanical valve that I have is very loud. So I'll hear it start moving faster and faster from 60 beats a minute to 70, 80, 90 on time to take
Really?
metoprolol. Yes.
And you notice that in the cycle of a day, because I can't really say that I notice that. I have experimented with, when I had less information and when I was younger and maybe quite naive, I have experimented with, do I really need this and all that kind of thing. And I noticed the side effects then of the valve beating more loudly and stuff. But you will notice it in the flow of a day, will you?
You probably take extended relief like metoprolol succinate. I take the tartrate version, which is just, it is not extended release. It just hits you all at once. And then your liver
I see.
metabolizes it and your body flushes it out. So I'm
Okay.
probably more prone to experiencing those dips, those valleys and peaks. But
Yes.
the downside of having that loud valve is whenever I go into AFib, I can hear it, and it's almost even more of a PTSD trigger because it's
Mm.
like, oh no, here we go again. I'm back in AFib. I can hear it. If I couldn't hear the AFib, the trigger wouldn't be as strong. I might feel it, but I wouldn't hear it, especially at night when everything is quiet. So
That's so
yeah,
interesting. Although I had AFib after the operation, my one of my behaviors is sometimes some arrhythmia, and so irregular heartbeat, and uh, that can be a trigger. You take my pulse, and then it pauses, and and even moments where I feel the rush going up to my head of the pause, and lying down horizontally in bed at the end of the day. And because the valve isn't connected to the brain or in any way, the valve just flaps open, doesn't it, with pressure. So sometimes I can feel that sort of rush through me, and it's just not very pleasant, isn't it? Is it? It's one of those things where it's inside us. And I remember early on, in recovery, and then maybe the first couple of years, I had this annoying feeling of sort of wanting to get in and like fiddle with it. Like, let me adjust this valve. Um,
sometimes I forget how loud it is. I was at
yeah.
the postal the other day, the postal office, and the person in front of me turned around and said, "My grandmother has one of those." And I thought he was talking about my jacket. But I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, "Yes, your valve. I can hear it." So I don't know if
Interesting. Yeah.
people can hear your valve, but mine's that loud.
Yeah, I've heard plenty of stories about that. I know someone who says they've never slept because their valve is so loud, and nurses will say the same thing. My little story about that was through some background in documentary making. I was doing a voiceover a few years out, and standing there with this lady, and she suddenly said to me, "Have you got a pacemaker or something?" And of course, out on the audio track came this kind of rabbit thumping. Um, so yeah.
It's a good metronome.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I suppose it's nice, I think, us Brits, if, our sense of humor, we're quite good at laughing at ourselves. And I try to look at the kind of absurdities of all of that, really, and it can be quite funny. Um, so moving on, then, you mentioned, challenges and recovery and so forth, and wanting to maybe live your life for how you really want to live it. Were you pre-dissection into Qigong?
No, um, I was very health focused and health conscious, but it wasn't until I started seeing the value of Qigong when my wife was practicing Qigong. And so I really saw the positive impact that she had. And she was talking to me about uh, doing Qigong. Although I did exercise, ride my bike, and walk a lot, I, I found an affinity to Qigong through Judy because Qigong was so applicable and easy to do for disabled people. You could sit in your chair, you didn't have to do inversions, and you could do simple exercises that gave you so much benefit. It was unbelievable, the benefit I found in moving chi through simple exercises. So I explored it more and more, took a course, worked with Marissa with yochi.com, and attended intensive training sessions. And then I got my teaching certificate, and I've been doing a lot of Qigong teaching, and I love it. I just think that it's one of the most wonderful, accessible forms of exercise there is, and it's so very important because a lot of us survivors during recovery will sit in a chair because we can't move. And so I always say one of the best things you can do if you're sitting in your recliner and you cannot get out of your recliner is to move your arms. You have 7 muscles in your arms. You have 4 around the inner rotator cuff, and then you have 3 deltoid muscles, a rear, a middle, and an anterior deltoid. And if you don't move those muscles, then they lock up and you get locked shoulders. And locked shoulders can just translate to more stagnation throughout your body. There you go. Excellent. So very simple exercises and just moving your arms. And I liken it
It's
to
immediately relaxed my upper chest. I've been sitting here in a not very comfortable chair, feeling a bit tense in my back, and that immediately me thinking, oh, I mustn't get too tense, because that will push my blood pressure up. But just and what I have learned about this from other exercises is this opens up the upper lung, doesn't it?
It does.
Which is very important for open heart surgery recovery, because we can lose lung capacity.
And another great way to open up lung capacity is to do belly breathing. On the inhale, your belly expands, and that drops your diaphragm. When you drop your diaphragm, you have so much more space for fresh oxygen to come in and flow through your organs and your body. So belly breathing, very important. Moving your arms, very important. It's a dance. It really is. You can do a beautiful, healthy dance in your recliner, and you don't have to get up and sweat. Qigong is so valuable.
And as I understand it, you do a show on a Sunday?
Yes, 12:30.
Would you just like to just say a couple of words about that? I know some regulars will probably watch it, but for other people out there who might like to work with the maestro.
John, we do simple Qigong for disabled people and senior citizens, and we might do a little bit of standing Qigong, but most of it is seated Qigong, and it's so much fun, so wonderful. It's such a beautiful dance to feel the Qi flow through your body. People ask me, what is Qi? And I tell them very briefly, it's life force. It's potential that's in your body, and you want that Qi to always flow. No stagnation.
Yes. And which, of course, is very similar to the principles of acupuncture, which I'd like to talk about a little bit, which is often working with blockages in the body, isn't it? Blockages of energy, building up of kind of crystals. Now, aortic dissection survivors, sufferers might worry with, through no fault of their own, but just because they don't know, oh, can I have needles put in my body, because I'll bleed, won't I? So walk us through that one.
Oh, well, until I started working with acupuncture, I had my doubts, but I have seen so much benefit learning and working in clinic. Acupuncture has just got so much potential, especially for aortic dissection survivors, John, because what it can do is relax all the muscles in your body, which in turn puts that much less strain on your aorta, decreasing your blood pressure, decreasing that cortisol release, down regulating sympathetic nervous system response, eliminating fatigue. And we just went through a cadaver lab about a month ago, and I found it so fascinating because before I was doing acupuncture, like with the door closed, through the needles through the skin. But in the cadaver lab, we dissected all the way to the bone. And you can very clearly see how the needles, when they're inserted into a muscle or into a tendon area, can actually create long reaching benefits in breaking up muscle tension and muscle stagnation. So this science is over 3,000 years old, this medicine, and is very effective. It's one of the most crowdsourced type of medicines that's been proven throughout millennia. And I have seen some amazing things happen with acupuncture. So I'm so excited to be able to share it with survivors in the future.
I would support that as an old lag of 18 years out. So I've got some skin in the game. I had acupuncture for many years. I found it very beneficial, though I'm not going to pretend that I always enjoy the needles, especially when they get put in and then there's that little tweaking of the needle to make you feel something.
Right.
And there will be certain points in my body which will like, yeah.
Those are the points that need it the most.
Exactly. Yeah. So if Joshua's there and with us, we would most welcome any contributions or questions. So
let's say hi to some chat here.
Okay.
Right away, we changed the schedule this morning, and so Velda and Molly were in at noon. And so
oh dear.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Melissa's here. Natalie's here. Christina's here. Molly says hi, Kevin.
Hey, Molly.
So Natalie, earlier in the broadcast, Natalie said survivor guilt. What's the reference name again? Am I a surviving survivor? Is that it?
That question, I got a bit lost there. Well, run that by me one more time, please, Joshua.
Sure. So survivor guilt, right?
So does Natalie want clarification on that?
Yes.
What it is?
Mm-hmm.
The concept as understood, as I understand it, is, for example, maybe not so often in an individual case, but quite frequently car crashes, plane crashes, whatever, that somebody survives in one seat and the person next to them doesn't, or the same in warfare happens to soldiers. Why did my colleague take one in the head and I was just centimeters away and I didn't? And so they feel guilty about their right to be here, which can be very debilitating.
I can give you a personal example. So on our Aortic Facebook page, the one that I started way back, we have a few members, but I used to post articles from newspapers whenever someone died of an aortic dissection. And that went on for a couple of years. And after a while, I started feeling really guilty that I was actually the survivor here. And so I don't know that I did it consciously, but I stopped publishing those accounts. I kind of published them in honor of the deceased, but I started feeling guilty that I was still alive and able to do this. And I honestly felt better not looking at the accounts of other people that have succumbed to dissection. So it's a complicated issue, definitely.
Yes. I think survivor guilt can also be experienced around the sense of demand it can put on family, the way it can change lives within the family, particularly financially, and the guilt that maybe for many people you don't feel like you were before. So there can be guilt around that.
I'd like to interject here. In the support
Sure.
groups, one of the darker sides that we hear from, you will hear somebody say, you know, right after they woke me up and I saw everything that happened to me, I looked at the doctor and I said, "Why did you even bother saving me?" Right? And we've heard that sentiment, you know, quite a bit actually in those early days when everything is absolutely sideways. Another
Because the
take,
person is struggling so much, you mean?
just so they lost so much. Their you know their ability to
Yeah.
work. You know, it'll take a year or more to get back on your feet. You know, I've seen people get a sense of adventure 2.5, 3 years out, but you know that early
Yes.
stage is very, very all consuming. I didn't want to respond to Natalie, but when the way you were describing it from a war aspect is something that another client of mine, we interviewed a gentleman who lost his legs in Iraq, and you know when they asked him about post-traumatic stress and they asked him about survivor guilt, he was like, you know, it's hard for me to have survivor guilt. He goes, you know, if I felt guilty about living, then you know the friends that I lost in the ambush, you know, it feels like me being guilty would have been taking away from what they went through, what they did. And when it comes to the post-traumatic stress side of things, he was awake and alert through the ambush, even though like they put his legs on his chest and then they put him on a gurney and he was holding his legs and he was like, I can't believe this is happening to me. And then finally, you know, people were talking to him after they put the first aid, the tourniquets and so forth. And then finally somebody gave him some pain meds and he drifted to sleep and woke up in the hospital. And so he didn't have that, but he was, you know, when he was in the recovery room and he was listening to the other soldiers, he heard it, and he heard a lot of people that were talking about it because they didn't know what happened. Like they blacked out as if, you know, whatever horrific situation they had to deal with was there. And I was, you know, I was taken aback by the story. It's a very touching story.
I've had a number of very close friends in the survivors group that have passed over the last several years. People that I've known living with dissection for almost a decade. And I do ask myself on their untimely death, you know, boy, I'm really lucky I'm still here. How fortunate, or luck of the draw, or whatever. But I take advantage of every day. I really do have a passion for life every day.
Yeah. He was very big on the attitude of gratitude.
So Joshua, what you were also going into is my point about being careful not to use guilt as an excuse, or there's always a level and an issue beneath guilt. What is the guilt masking? So what you're kind of saying there is that, you know, he's not honoring his colleagues, is he, by feeling guilty?
Mm-hmm.
He's not honoring their memory. He's been much better off, you know, doing something in their memory.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And so I hope that helps, Natalie.
Yes.
So she does say here, you mentioned a book about surviving survival. Is that what?
Yes. Go to Google, type in surviving survival. It's I can't remember the author's name. That's the pump head. But it's such a wonderful book to read. There's actually several books, but Steve G, he's departed now, gone over the rainbow. Steve recommended it to me, and I thought it was one of the best books I've ever read in dealing with the PTSD issue of post-dissection life.
Okay, thank you for that. Dean's joined the chat. Hello, Dean. Melissa says that cultural mores and ways are coming light more. Popo, aka Grandma, was correct with all the herbs, mores, qigong, acupressure, food, Chinese arts. Right? She's throwing a little mention over to Velda because Velda started acupuncture not too long ago. Natalie
Nine.
also goes on to say, I just love how John says things that many think but few say out loud. I appreciate that so much. Real talk.
That's nice to hear.
Yeah.
Yes. But you see, the interesting thing about that is it's been a journey for me to talk about my condition, because I sort of grow up in a culture which is sort of quite British, it's maybe improved a lot post Princess Diana and all that kind of thing. But in that sort of British thing is like, you don't talk about your feelings, stiff upper lip. And the way, I can give you a sort of a contrast where I once was talking to someone from a Scandinavian country, and I said to them, how are you? Are you okay? And the person replied, I'm fine. Why wouldn't I be? Now, a Brit would never say that. They'd never be that direct. But so, for me to talk about my condition has been a journey in itself, not to feel guilty about doing that I'm sort of bothering people with it. You're smiling, Kevin.
I think it's a badge of honor. Sometimes I have to squelch myself from saying, hi, I'm Kevin. Yes. I'm an aortic dissection survivor.
Yeah.
It's opened so many doors, John. It really has. It's been such a blessing. I have met so many people like Josh and Karen and you and Val. Just everybody is just been so amazing.
Okay, and we're going to draw to a close now because I have to move on. I always ask people, and in a way, you're giving us this impression anyway. I would just want to pay tribute and testament to your spirit and this joie de vivre I pick up from you. I mean, it's resonating to me. I'm hopefully going to carry that with me. So thank you for that. What my ending question with people is, can you give us an example of something very simple that makes you joyful?
Just a deep breath.
Ah, that's nice. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Kevin, for joining me. It's been enlightening, fascinating, inspiring. Thank you, Joshua. Thank you to everybody out there. Hope this is useful in some ways. Wish you all a very good rest of the day.
Thank you, gentlemen,
Bye-bye.
for a very enlightening conversation. And thank you, Melissa, for pointing out this book is called Surviving Survival, The Art and Science of Resilience by Lawrence Gonzalez.
That's it. That's it.
I'm going to look at that.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And we will see you next week.
Bye now.